Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Originally the idea for this one was to look at the second half of the Sinister 6 lineup, so that would be Sandman, Vulture, and Mysterio, but unfortunately those characters are so lackluster in both PvE and PvP that there isn't really much to showcase there. With the exception of Mysterio though, which I do showcase him since he isn't even remotely as bad as those other two. But because I couldn't really get much going with him in PvP, I'm only showing the PvE performance for Mysterio, and to fill up the rest of the video, I actually decked out and finished my builds for Green Goblin and Electro, and showcase how they perform in score modes like ABX and Squad Battle, as well as Timeline. Even though Doc Ock got an amazing upgrade, the real stars of this update really have to be Green Goblin and Electro. The first thing I'm looking at is Mysterio in PvE, and my build doesn't have a damage proc, I'm only using a CTP of Authority. If you want to use the character for PvE and possibly max out his PvE potential, then a CTP of Judgment would likely be the best for that, though you can also make him work with a proc or a single skill proc based CTP like an energy or a destruction. Even though this uniform is 2 or 3 years old now, or basically when Far From Home came out, it's still able to finish a stage 60 of Thanos with about 30 seconds left. Since Mysterio has mind resistance down on his 5th skill, which ignores immunity, I took him into a stage 99 of Cull Obsidian, which he actually could do, and I finished that with 2 minutes and 15 seconds remaining. The simple rotation that you can use for Mysterio is basically to use your 4th skill, delay cancel it after he goes up in the chair and the green circle appears, and then go into the 5th skill, and that's the skill that you may proc on, but if you don't proc on that skill, then you delay cancel that into the 2nd skill. So a simple rotation could be something like 4, delay cancel 3, cancel 5, and then if you don't proc on the 5th skill, you can delay cancel into the 2nd skill. Otherwise, let the 5th play out and you can go into the 2nd skill afterwards. This would be the rotation for something like an energy or destruction, and keep in mind that when you delay cancel the 5th skill, you basically want to do it after the camera angle changes a little bit and the big form of himself appears. If you cancel it too early, then you'll miss out on all the damage from the 5th skill. Once you have the character awakened, you would use the 6th skill after you cancel the 4th skill, and the 6th skill can be insta-cancelled. So that means that a possible rotation with the awakening would be 4, delay cancel 3, cancel 6, cancel into 5, and then again, if you proc, stay in the 5th skill, otherwise you delay cancel into the 2nd skill. You can see the value that the stat bump and the awakening skill has for the character, since I'm able to complete stage 60 roughly about a minute and 30 seconds faster. If you want to try a more advanced rotation for Mysterio, possibly with a Judgment, I haven't really tested that out, but the one that I went with no proc that yielded the most damage for me was to use the 4th and delay cancel it into the 5th, which you delay cancel to the 3, cancel 1, and then wait about a half second till the 4th is back up, which you delay cancel into the 2nd skill before going back to the beginning of the rotation. So that likely sounded like nonsense and was probably confusing, but to simplify it, you basically do 2 mini sets of rotations that you alternate between one another. The first one is for delay cancel 5, delay cancel, and then the second part is 3, cancel 1, and then after about a half second or second, your 4th is back off cooldown, so you do 4, cancel 2. So I'm not entirely sure how this would work with a CTP of Judgment, but my hope would be that the proc for the Judgment would activate somewhere around the middle of the 5th skill or possibly the end, and by that point you'll have the damage accumulation also built up and the proc active once you go into your 2nd skill. With the awakening skill having that whole defense down on it, coupled with the mind resist down on his 5th skill, you can see the benefit that has on world boss ultimate stages that are affected by things like that. I'm able to clear Cull in about 2 minutes, or roughly a minute faster than before. Now, although those clear times aren't bad, you can definitely see that they're a little bit dated, which is obviously the case because this uniform is fairly old. I did take him into a stage 9 of Knull with no supports but Chavez's damage leadership to see how he would do, and unfortunately with no proc I wasn't able to complete the stage, but I did get really close. For a 3-year-old uniform, that's actually pretty commendable. But if they actually did damage accumulation based on damage dealt, I feel like this uniform would be vastly superior, since it's sometimes tough to take damage even in World Boss Legend, where the opponent can hit you through the iframes. Like I mentioned before, there isn't really much to say about Sandman or Vulture, though I did take Vulture into stage 60 of Thanos after being awakened, and with a 180% damage proc obelisk, I was able to complete the stage with about 30 seconds remaining. Unfortunately, that's not saying much, and this character, along with Sandman and to a lesser extent Mysterio, could have really benefited from a more modern, updated uniform. It's kind of disappointing that the devs gave these characters an awakening and an artifact when they still basically haven't really moved up the scale in terms of their performance. There's always a chance that these characters get a uniform in the near future, but I think it would be more beneficial to the devs and the players if they offered an upgraded form of the same kind of uniform, similar to the Agents of Atlas update, where the devs gave Arrow and Swordmaster a new uniform that looked very similar to their base look, but it provided increased hit counts to their skills as well as additional damage and other abilities or stats. I believe they also did this with the last Fantastic Four uniforms that we got. So in the future, if the devs are too busy to make new animations or looks for the uniforms, they could always consider just making slight color variations with increased hit counts, more damage, and additional abilities to the skills. And since they did have the 2 uniform costs in the past, they had the normal one that we're used to now, but they also had the 750 crystal ones as well, I believe. Those generally weren't as powerful uniforms, but they did provide some advantage to the character by making them playable in a sense. Basically what I'm trying to say is that if character is going to be featured in an update, then it would make sense that that character actually becomes usable in the majority of the game modes. Otherwise, there's no point to upgrade them outside of the benefits that it has in story mode and possibly Alliance Conquest. Moving on, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I also upgraded Green Goblin's build, so now I have a mighty CTP of Destruction on him that has that reforged strike proc going up to 120% additional damage versus bosses, and in addition to that, I also upgraded all of his ISOs, awakening them to have a fully awakened ISO 8 set. I was also lucky enough to get a 4-star artifact from the Essence chest, which allowed me to get the rank 8 build that you see now. Using this build and the 22% pierce that I have on my cards, as well as the 122% additional multiplier that I get because I have all the T3s and Transcended characters, I was able to score in the 9.2 million range roughly in Squad Battle Vibranium League. Keep in mind that this isn't even the limit to the score that I can get, since I don't have Black Cat's artifact yet. Once the character gets his T3 or possibly even Awakening, he should be able to easily score in the 10 million range, and that's considering if his ultimate skill isn't even that good. The stat bump alone should allow him to reach those levels or those scores, but with a strong T3 skill, he might even be able to reach the 11 million mark for some of those high-end PvE players. For most players who don't have as many Awakened or T3 characters, I would suspect that his score with a similar kind of build would probably hit somewhere in the 5 to 6 million point range. Because he did so well in Squad Battle just at T2, I wanted to see how he would fare in Alliance Battle Extreme, and he is surprisingly really good in that mode, and I would suspect will definitely be the meta character for Speed Villain Day when he gets his upgrade. I was already scoring in the 8.8 million range with the mighty CTP of Destruction, and keep in mind, like I said before, I don't have Black Cat's artifact, And with this particular setup that I'm running, I don't have an insight on Black Cat either, so I could easily be able to hit the 9 million range, or possibly even as high up as 9.2 million. The character is very proc friendly, but if you want to squeeze out the max damage from your build, I would suspect that a Judgment would probably allow you to do that, since you aren't often able to miss your proc, and because the first skill does a lot of damage as well, which you can still use on that 5-second window near the end of it. The rotation that I used to get this score was a 2 with a slight delay cancel into 5 with a delay cancel into 4, which is what I procced on. After that's over, you do the first skill and then you go back into the same rotation, but in the second time that you do the rotation, you won't have the strike proc from your mighty CTP of destruction. Once you go into the rotation again, you should be able to have accumulated the movement since he moves around so much in his skills, and you'll have it on every other proc basically. I did try to move around to get the strike proc on every rotation, but you end up losing out too much damage from moving around. Similarly for Electro, I also fixed up his build. Though I don't have his artifact, I did end up awakening all of his ISOs and switched out the custom gear that I had for a mighty regeneration with the penetration proc. Even though I built Electro for PvP, I also took him into Alliance Battle Extreme with that speed villain type restriction just to see how he would do. I did have to switch into Green Goblin since Electro doesn't have burn damage to cancel the Frost Beast's roar. With that, I was able to score in the 8.3 million range, which could possibly be closer to the 8 million range, but that is still really good for a character with no damage proc on. Meaning that with a full PvE build, with something like a CTP of Judgment or a mighty CTP of Judgment, most players should be able to hit the 9.5 million range or possibly 10 million or higher. Very similarly to how Kate could do the same. But for players that want to use Green Goblin for ABX, they might be left with wondering what to do with Electro, and I have to say he's actually really good in PvP, especially from the results that I got in timeline testing now that all those crazy challenger buffs were removed. His damage is so good even without a proc that I was basically one-shotting top metas, including characters like Doom and Thanos. This is one reason why I opted to go with a defensive-based build first, since he can stay alive a little bit longer to go into his third skill, and his first skill moves him around across the map, meaning that he can almost max charge his damage accumulation and allow his fifth or fourth to one-shot characters and possibly even his second skill. One of the reasons that I went with regen specifically is because he often goes into his fifth skill, and even if it does get cancelled, he gets the benefit of that invincible that's on it, meaning that if you go with something like a CTP of Authority, it could be a little bit redundant in that sense. Besides that, he often rotates into his fourth skill afterwards, followed by his third skill, and his third skill has 35% health recovery on it, meaning that if you go with a regen that has extra recovery stat on it, it boosts it up to almost double that, meaning that it basically goes up to 70% healing. Coupled with the fact that his base HP is above average, it means that the character synergizes really well with the CTP of regen. To go even further, if you're able to reforge the CTP and get the penetration effect on it, it also combines very well with the character's kit, since he has a lot of AoE damage on the map, and if the penetration effect knocks the character out of their skills, possibly even their iframe skills, they'll land in all that damage and you'll likely take them out from it. Besides the benefits that I mentioned for the penetration, the character tends to iframe and move around a lot, meaning they'll build up that meter, and it likely happens when the opponent uses their iframe ignore skill, and because that usually is a strong skill for most characters, having that skill be cancelled is a huge bonus for the character. You'll see what I mean in this fight, since that penetration proc was able to save Electro from being one hit by Thanos' fourth skill, which is an iframe ignore skill. If you don't have a lot of health on your cards, say 50 or 60%, you can also go with the CTP of Authority, and I'm sure it would work really well on him, since the damage accumulation from the Authority won't contradict the damage accumulation that he gets from his third skill, which is movement based. If you don't have a lot of damage on your cards and want to hit harder versus metas, you can also go with something like a CTP of Greed and possibly even a Destruction, but keep in mind that the Destruction penetration will be redundant since his fourth skill has that 60% on it and he often rotates into it. But despite what you build, you can see that Electro is really good in PvP. He likely won't be used in Timeline since there are better options there, but I can see the character being a really strong pick for Alliance Conquest. So as you can see, even though Green Goblin doesn't have his upgrade and his kit is pretty straightforward, he's actually really strong and more than likely will be meta in multiple score-based modes. Depending on the type of upgrade that he gets, he could possibly be rivaling Loki for one of the best free-to-play damage characters. Even if you don't want to use him as your main damage dealer, the fact that he has his own leadership and a villain damage buff support means that this uniform is amazing value. Funny enough, even though a lot of people thought that Electro would be the clear-cut winner for the Speed Villain Day for both Squad Battle and Alliance Battle Extreme, that could be going to Green Goblin now. But if you already got Electro's new uniform and have him built for PvE, or haven't decided yet, building him for PvP will definitely give you value out of the uniform, especially if you play a lot of Alliance Conquest. Speaking of Alliance Conquest, I'm going to be testing these characters there, as well as Doc Ock and some of the other Awakened characters, so when I get enough info on that, I'll be making a video and you can see how good they perform there. Besides a tier list upgrade and what I just mentioned, I also have some other ideas that I'm working with for potential videos, so make sure to stay tuned for those. As always, thank you for your time and watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the videos if you enjoyed them. But the video is now over.